He was just a man walking down the street, carrying a small paper bag. To anyone else, he would have been invisible. But to two officers, he became a target. Without warning, they stopped him, searched him in front of a growing crowd, and began mocking him for no reason other than their own biases. They took his money that didn't belong to them, and humiliated him without a second thought. What they didn't know, though, was that this man was no ordinary citizen. On that very day, he had stepped into a new role, one that would change everything. They had just stolen from their new chief of police, and they had no idea. This is the story of how a moment of injustice turned into the lesson of a lifetime for the officers and for an entire department. Marcus Johnson was no stranger to the world of law enforcement. A black man who had spent years rising through the ranks, earning respect through skill, integrity and dedication, he had just been promoted to the highest position in the precinct, chief of police. It should have been the proudest moment of his career. And yet, on his first day in the role, he made an unexpected decision, a decision that would change the course of the day and ultimately his entire department. Dressed casually, wearing a hoodie and jeans instead of his usual uniform, Marcus wanted to experience the city from a different perspective, as someone who wasn't in charge, someone who was just another face on the street. Little did he know his decision to blend in would soon lead to the most humiliating experience of his life. As he walked out of a small convenience store with a simple paper bag in his hand, Marcus didn't stand out. He was just another man going about his day. He had no idea that his quiet walk would soon be interrupted by two officers who would take it upon themselves to judge him based on nothing more than his appearance. Detectives Ray and Max, both seasoned officers, spotted him as he walked down the street. Their eyes narrowed. They didn't need a reason to stop him. They had already made up their minds. As the two officers approached, Marcus could feel the shift in the air. It was subtle at first, a strange feeling of unease that began to settle over him. Detectives Ray and Max didn't ask for his identification or offer a polite greeting. Instead, they began questioning him, their tone sharp and demanding, their words laced with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" one of them asked. "Where's your ID?" The questions came quickly, almost as if they were rehearsed, but Marcus knew exactly what was happening. They didn't see him as a man. They saw a target. A crowd started to gather, their eyes fixed on the scene. They watched in silence, unsure of how to react. But the uncomfortable truth was clear. No one was stepping in. The onlookers weren't there to help, and Marcus knew that if he raised his voice or made a scene, things would only get worse. The weight of the moment was heavy, and the humiliation unbearable. His mind raced, but his exterior remained calm. The officers weren't interested in understanding. They were interested in asserting their power. They continued to demand he empty his pockets, to reveal more than was necessary. The crowd was still, holding their collective breath, but Marcus stood motionless. The sound of his own heartbeat drowned out the noise around him. He knew that any wrong move would escalate this into something far worse. As they rifled through his pockets, they found his wallet, a significant amount of cash inside. Marcus could see the way their eyes shifted, how their judgment deepened. They looked at him with disdain, questioning how someone like him could have so much money. The accusations came without a shred of evidence, their eyes filled with bias. And then it happened. With no explanation, no justification, Detectives Ray and Max took the cash. Their fingers ran over the bills as though they were entitled to it, as though it was theirs to take. The crowd murmured softly, but no one intervened. No one stood up for Marcus. It was as if they were all complicit in the moment, witnesses to a crime yet silent. The officers walked away, still laughing about their success. They were proud, feeling as though they'd accomplished something important, unaware that they'd just humiliated the one person who had the power to expose their actions. The day continued as any other at the precinct. At least, that's what Ray and Max thought. They returned to the station, still riding high from their perceived victory on the streets. Inside the break room, they joked about the man they had just humiliated, laughing about how easily they had taken control of the situation. To them, it had been just another day of asserting their authority, with no consequences, just another random encounter that didn't warrant a second thought. Their laughter filled the room as they exchanged stories of similar experiences, their arrogance growing with every word. They couldn't have been more wrong about what was to come. But then, the precinct door swung open. It was the kind of entrance that made everyone in the room pause, a shift in the air that commanded attention. The sound of heels clicking sharply against the floor echoed through the room. All eyes turned as a figure entered. Marcus Johnson, now dressed in the full Chief of Police uniform. The transformation was immediate and undeniable. The man they had mocked just hours ago now stood before them, exuding a calm authority that no one could ignore. His uniform, crisp and immaculate, seemed to radiate power. The room fell silent. Ray and Max froze. At first, they didn't recognize him. Their eyes moved from his face to the uniform and back again. The realization came slowly. Then all at once, their smug expressions faded, replaced by shock and a creeping fear. The man they had humiliated in front of a crowd on the street was the very man now standing in front of them, the Chief of Police. In that moment, they realized the gravity of their mistake, and it hit them harder than any arrest or reprimand ever could. They had just stolen from their chief, disrespected the one person they should have been showing respect to. They were trapped in the knowledge that the consequences for their actions would be far beyond anything they had ever imagined. Marcus didn't waste a single moment. The officers' smug faces may have fallen when they realized who he was, but it was only the beginning of their reckoning. Without hesitation, he called detectives Ray and Max into his office. There was no room for ambiguity or delay. This needed to be addressed immediately. As they walked into his office, they were visibly tense, their earlier bravado now replaced with uncertainty. Marcus didn't give them a chance to speak first. He sat behind his desk, his gaze steady and unwavering, as he looked at both officers. "You both know exactly why I've called you in here," he began, his voice calm, yet full of authority. "What happened earlier today was not just an abuse of power, it was a direct betrayal of everything this department stands for." The weight of his words sank in. There was no excuse, no justification that could make what they had done right. Marcus's eyes met theirs as he explained the misconduct, detailing how they had humiliated an innocent man in public, taking his money with no cause, no probable reason other than the biases they had let cloud their judgment. He spoke firmly, yet with the restraint of someone who knew that justice would soon be served. Ray and Max, who had once laughed off their actions, were silent now, each struggling to find the words to defend themselves. But there was nothing they could say. Marcus had already laid out the truth too clearly. Marcus stood, his presence now even more commanding. "This isn't just about one bad decision. This is about integrity, accountability, and the respect we owe to every individual, especially those who trust us to protect them. As of now, an internal investigation will be launched, and you both are suspended pending the outcome." The officers stood motionless, fully aware of what was at stake. Marcus had no intentions of letting their actions slide. This wasn't just a moment of punishment, it was a message that actions like theirs would not be tolerated under his watch. As word of the incident spread throughout the precinct, the atmosphere shifted. Tension was thick in the air, with whispers and rumors circulating behind closed doors. Detectives Ray and Max had been suspended, and the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in for everyone. No one was sure what the fallout would look like, but one thing was clear: this moment had exposed a crack in the department's foundation, and it couldn't be ignored. Marcus, ever the leader, didn't let the uncertainty fester. He called for a full meeting with all the staff. The room grew quiet as everyone took their seats, a sense of unease lingering in the air. Marcus stepped into the room, his presence commanding attention. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the moment he would reshape the culture of the entire precinct. He began by addressing the situation head-on, speaking with the calm authority of someone who had spent years navigating the complexities of law enforcement, but also with the conviction of someone who was willing to change things for the better. "Today," Marcus started, his voice steady but powerful, "we've seen a stark example of what happens when we let bias cloud our judgment. The actions of two of our officers today weren't just a failure of protocol. They were a failure of the values we're sworn to uphold, and we cannot afford to let that happen again." The room was still. Marcus let his words hang in the air, giving everyone a moment to absorb the weight of the message. Respect, accountability, and integrity are not just words on a piece of paper. They must be the foundation of everything we do. Every person we encounter, every decision we make, is a reflection of who we are as individuals and as a department. Today's actions betrayed that, but they also gave us an opportunity to make real change. Marcus's speech wasn't just a reprimand, it was a call to action. He didn't stop there. He knew that words alone wouldn't change anything. He needed to take steps to ensure that this type of behavior would never happen again. "Starting today," Marcus continued, "we will be implementing new training programs focused on bias awareness, community relations, and ethics. We'll be taking a hard look at how we approach our work, and we'll hold each and every one of you accountable for upholding the values of this department. Regular evaluations will be put in place to ensure we stay on track, and every officer will be held to the highest standard." As he spoke, a shift began to occur. Officers who had once felt disconnected from the larger purpose of their work started to listen. They could feel the weight of the changes coming, but more importantly, they could feel the optimism that Marcus was injecting into the department. They weren't just there to enforce the law, they were there to serve the community with integrity. Marcus wasn't just changing rules, he was changing mindsets. Officers began to realize that under his leadership, this department could truly become a force for good, a place where accountability and respect would be the norm, not the exception. There was a collective sense of relief, a sense that the changes coming could actually make them better officers and better people. The consequences for Detectives Ray and Max came quickly, and with them, the harsh reality of their actions. As they packed their belongings in silence, the weight of what had happened settled in. Their careers, once steady and unchallenged, now hung by a thread. Both knew that their chances of ever returning to law enforcement were slim to none. The world they had built, one of arrogance and entitlement, was crumbling around them. But their downfall was only part of the story. As the news of the incident broke, the city was left in shock. The public, once trusting of their police force, now found themselves questioning the integrity of the entire precinct. Calls for accountability grew louder, and protests soon followed. People demanded answers, and the precinct's reputation, built over decades, was suddenly under siege. Marcus, however, stood firm. The pressure was mounting, but he knew that what he had done was right. He could not allow this incident to become a footnote. The message had to be clear, not just to his officers, but to the city at large. He addressed the city in a televised statement, his voice calm but resolute. No one, no matter their position, no matter their title, is above the law. What happened was unacceptable, and it will not be tolerated under my watch. This department will hold itself to the highest standards of integrity, and we will rebuild the trust we have lost. We owe that to every citizen of this city. His words were firm, a clear declaration that accountability was not just a concept, it was a promise. The fallout was far from over, but Marcus had set the course for a new beginning. The incident, which began with injustice and humiliation, had now become the catalyst for a transformation that would reshape the precinct and perhaps the city itself. As the dust settled and the initial shock faded, The city and the precinct began to heal. The bold steps taken by Marcus had set a new course, one that was rooted in justice, accountability, and the pursuit of fairness. What began as a personal moment of humiliation had turned into the driving force for a systemic change that reverberated throughout the department and beyond. Marcus had not only exposed the flaws within his own team, but had also shown the city that real leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. The officers under Marcus's command were now beginning to see the shift. They understood that being a part of this department wasn't about exerting power. It was about earning respect through actions and integrity. New training programs were already being implemented, and officers were beginning to evaluate not just their skills, but their mindsets. The lessons of accountability and fairness had already started to take root. Marcus's leadership style went beyond enforcement. It became a model for how to serve with honor. His strength wasn't in his uniform or his badge, but in his unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when it cost him. And that's exactly what he proved when he turned a devastating moment into the foundation for real and lasting change. As Marcus looked toward the future, he knew the road ahead would be tough. But he was resolute in his belief that true leadership meant standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. He had set the example, and now it was time for others to follow. Real leadership, he often said, means standing up for justice, even when it costs you. It's about accountability, fairness, and leading by example. It's about ensuring that we do right by the people we serve, even when we face the hardest moments. Under Marcus's leadership, the department became stronger, not just in numbers, but in values. A new chapter had begun, one where every officer knew they would be held accountable, and where every citizen could trust that their voices would be heard.